Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome back to the Insurtech Insights webinar. This is, of course, part of our weekly webinar series that goes live every Wednesday at 9 a.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in the UK, and 10 p.m. in Hong Kong. So good morning to everyone stateside, good afternoon, to our European friends, and good evening to everyone tuning in from Asia. Thanks so much for joining wherever and whenever you are. A reminder, as always, we would love to hear from you. So please do comment in the comments tab and say hello, tell us where you're tuning in from, what you think of the speakers and the topic, and you can also ask questions in that Q&A tab on the right hand side of your screen. But even if you're not asking a question, do have a look in there, and you'll find that you can upvote questions you find particularly interesting or relevant. We are, of course, going to prioritize the questions that have the most upvotes. So the sooner you write your question in the Q&A tab, the more likely it is that our speakers will answer it. And just before we go into these introductions, we are going to go over the topic. So we're thinking about the way that we can, rethink the way that we use data in insurance after all the madness of the past 11, 12 months. Can insurers and regulators do more, do better to get the most out of customer data? So we'll look at regulation and collaboration, that customer data, and then seeing if we can bring new value to that relationship, followed by our Q&A, and then key takeaways from our wonderful speakers. And now, speaking of our speakers, we've got some great guests for you here today. So we're just going to do some intros as always to kick things off. Starting up, we've got Daniele, the Chief Analytics Officer of BNP Paribas Cardiff, Italy. Daniele, lovely to have you here. How are you doing?
Great. Love to be here.
Daniele, why don't you do a bit of introduction for our attendees?
Okay, I'm Chief Analytics Officer of the entity of BNP Paribas Cardiff in Italy, and I lead all the analytics and artificial intelligence topics from, let's say, non-IT point of view, let's say. Well, that's an IT point of view, but the idea of our function is outside the IT. We have a real focus on modeling, and I lead two teams, one of data scientists and the other one of analytics manager, that let's say the business translator that bring the projects on and make things happen.
And certainly looking forward to hearing about how you've made those things happen so far, Daniele. Next up, very lucky to have Monica. Hey, Monica, how you doing?
I'm fine. Nice to be here.
Great to have you on board. Yeah, Monica, why don't you introduce yourself to our attendees?
So my name is Monica Monaco. I'm based in Brussels since 2003, so 18 years now. I am the founder and managing director of Trust EU Affairs. And what my company does is basically working on European regulation to monitor it and to advise our clients on what to do with it, if possible, before this becomes applicable.
We're going to have some great stuff from you, I'm sure. And last but certainly not least, we've got Alan. Hey, Alan, lovely to have you here. How's it going?
Oh, doing well, Merlin. Thank you.
Alan, likewise, why don't you cap us off with a little bit of an intro for our attendees?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Hello, Merlin, Danielle, and Monica. My name is Alan Doolin. I'm the global head of the solution consulting team for insurance and healthcare payers. I'm a part of a larger business unit called the Financial Services Global Business Unit. And in our responsibilities, we support clients globally in the public and private sector. In the context of this conversation, we have a wonderful team that focuses on solving some really unique and challenging business problems, which include the regulatory environment and the whole space of data assets. I'm also a founding member of the Information Society of Chief Data Officers, so I'm fortunate to meet and see CDOs from around the world a few times a year to hear about the challenges and pain points that are happening globally. And then last but not least, I'm finishing a PhD in leadership and change, where my focus is on data and innovation. So pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you, Alan. Expecting some awesome things from this panel today. And let's get to it then. So starting off, Alan, we'll kick things off with you. Interesting question, how have regulators and insurers worked together over the pandemic? I mean, is that something that you've seen or, something that you can describe a little bit?
Yeah, so to answer your question, I think in the data space, data executives, it really is a small community and ongoing collaboration to get clarity on what the requirements are and how to meet the requirements in the regulatory space. You often see so very highly collaborative, which is critical to alignment. I also see best practices being shared between regulators and insurers, and we're part of those conversations as well. Some of the techniques to meet these regulatory requirements often are shared as well, along with the data disciplines. I mean, it's interesting because, when you think about the regulatory environment, you'll find that there's one of two approaches being taken. We experience companies that are very much focused on satisfying the regulatory requirement because that's kind of the paradigm. But then we'll see other organizations establish enterprise data management strategies with the regulatory use case as the leading and priority use case. And so companies that take on that approach, they're building out data governance, data architecture, data quality, data analytics, data infrastructure. They're building out capability with the leading use case being the regulatory requirement, but then they've embraced this concept of making data a strategic asset. So I guess answering the question is, what I've seen is a highly collaborative community trying to solve some real challenging problems. And, for the most part, I think they're successfully achieving it. Monica, yeah. Anything to add from you, Monica?
Well, I would agree with Alan. I mean, I look at this from Brussels, and what I can see is that the industry is responding to all the Commission consultations, so all the European Commission's consultations going on issues related to data. They also see the involvement of the industry. I also see a number of events organized in town by industry to discuss these matters. For example, now with the Digital Markets Act that was very recently published, on which we will discuss in a second, I've seen a number of events being organized by industry just to discuss with the policymakers, to discuss with the Commission, to discuss also with the data authorities at national level in each of the member states, to try and understand how they see this, which kind of development this draft text could have. So yes, indeed, there is a lot of work going on hand in hand. Now, as far as data is concerned, what is happening at European level is that there are horizontal pieces of regulation coming up, which do not only concern insurance and the insurers, but concern more broadly, for example, platforms or intermediaries, the data companies that only do intermediation of data as a job. And in general, also, there is an interest from the institutions to regulate access to data broadly for all the financial services sector, for example. So it's really, I would say, a horizontal approach. And this is something very recent. I've been in Brussels a long time now, since 2003. So it's 18 years, and up to 3 or 4 years ago, we would have more, let's say, sector-tailored approach by regulators. And now more and more with this commission, especially, as a much more horizontal approach. So when they catch data in regulation, this is not only about insurance, this is going to be about financial services and any part of the industry. So there is a need of involvement of the industry, which is involved. I mean, I see them collaborating and working with the regulators. At least I can speak for my clients. I see this in a very active form.
And I mean, so is that kind of pertaining to what regulations really are we seeing over the past year? Well, let's broaden the conversation because we can, and I know your expertise, in the sort of financial space, what regulations have we really seen pertain to customer data over the past year or so?
Well, everything started for us here with the famous GDPR in 2016 with the regulation on data protection. That was something very cumbersome and came as a shock to the industry after the data protection directive that was very broad and quite old. So this was 2016. We had in the parliament a number of amendments. We had the creation of the DPA, the data protection, DPO, the data protection officer that should also report to the DPA, not only to the CEO of the company. So that was already very interesting to establish a line of reporting between the DPO and the National Supervisory Authority, something interesting. And this was about personal data. And the same year, the Commission also proposed to do the same kind of job to protect non-personal data, so metadata. And this came with the e-privacy regulation proposal. Now, the e-privacy regulation proposal had less luck than the GDPR in terms of being approved, because this started in 2017 and is still not finalized. So we are still in the middle of the, let's say, legislative procedure, because this proposal has been seen as very controversial from the industry, precisely because it will attribute also a role to DPOs as far as metadata are concerned, because it's trying to propose a protection of data, non-personal data, which is very, very wide. So in the last year, what we have seen is that the Parliament proposing a report on the e-privacy regulation, and the Council trying to achieve that. So the Council of the European Union, so the ministers, the 27 member states representatives, trying to achieve an agreement on this text, which is still not there. So after 4 years, so this is still ongoing. And so the last statement I've seen on this was, I think, was 5th or 6th of January, the Portuguese presidency. So you may know that we have a presidency of Europe that changes every 6 months. Now we are under the Portuguese presidency since the 1st of January. On the 5th of January, they stated that they will make of the e-privacy regulation a priority. So we know they are working on this. So I would say this is about what we've seen in the last years. But then this year has been a very productive year for the Commission in this respect, because the Commission produced a document called the New Consumer Agenda in November 2020. And there they mention a certain number of initiatives, including about data, notably the Digital Markets Act, and also some initiatives about artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence and algorithms are used to use data. So we've seen a lot, and I'm happy to describe these two proposals later in this webinar. But I can only say, all started with personal data, with the GDPR. And now we see more and more interest from the regulators about non-personal data, metadata, and also the intermediaries, so the companies dealing with this data, how they have to function, which data they can use, under which restrictions, etc. So there is enormous interest from the regulators on data. I would say what 10 years ago we would say about fees is now data. So in financial services, most of the people would say now the new fee is the data, because that's where the value is. And so the regulator attention is switching from fees and costs to data, because they can see this is the new value, where the value is for companies now.
And you mentioned, kind of the sort of the companies using their data, and I want to come back to that, because you mentioned things like metadata as well. But we will touch on that later in the session. But I am going to move on because we've got to bring in Daniele here for like we all know anyone probably listening at home. We're aware that there's a data problem. There's a lot of it. You want to work out. We want to derive value from it. We want to work out, how we can, essentially, as I say, get that value out of it. But Daniele, one thing is working out what data is actually useful. Daniele, how do you do that as a large insurer? What's that? What are the steps to that?
Yeah, well, one of the main things to leverage on is experience, for sure. Especially for the minimization principle that has to be taken into consideration, speaking about GDPR. And in terms of experience, we really can leverage on different angles of experience. I have in mind, for example, the business experience. I usually work with all the departments of my company. So I really work on different topics, and I get different perspectives on each topic. And it's very useful when you start investigating a specific a specific topic to keep the experience that the business point of view can give you in terms of what could be a good data that could be useful for what you are going to build, modeling or whatever it is. This is really helpful. Then another angle, another perspective is the analytics, let's say the data analytics perspective. With reference to my personal experience, we are through the years building our own view of the data. We, as I said, we work in very different project, and we deal each day with different data, and so we are acquiring day by day new experience on data that we can reuse on other project with what we learn in the past days, weeks, and months. Then also on our side, we can leverage on the market experience. So it's very useful to see how other in the same industry, so in the insurance industry, other companies has approached some topic, or some other industries has approached a similar topic. Then this can be very useful. There's a lot of information out there that we can leverage on, including the research. Depending on the topic you are working on, there's a lot of research out there that can be investigated, deep dive. So maybe the point here is that on technical, let's say technical, but it's not that true. Let's say skills like data scientists, for example, is having curiosity, creativity in looking for what could be worth involving in terms of data in the project you're dealing with. Then when you have like in my case an international environment, it's very useful also to have a good network with other group entities. We are lucky because we have our corporate offices that pivots very well the community, the data science community, data analytics community, so that when we approach a topic, we can search and compare ourselves and ask to our colleagues around the world how do they manage that topics, also in terms of data. So sometimes we have a list of data that has been used in another country that can be the starting point for our approaches. So in one word, experience is mainly the first point to start.
Yeah, absolutely. That experience is certainly key. And I mean, maybe we can also set things up. So Monica, coming back to you, is there anything that, for example, that the European Commission is working on right now that insurers are suddenly going to have to, flip over the monopoly board and start over again? Is there anything right now that insurers should be focused on from a regulation perspective?
So what we are looking at now is this document that was this proposal that was published in November, 24th of November 2020, which is called a proposal for a regulation on a European data governance. So this is known as the Data Governance Act. Now, this is very interesting. It's the first step of a data strategy from the Commission that will be followed up by other initiatives in 2021. And this is something we are all reflecting on now. What is the idea of this Data Governance Act? The idea is to create some form of secure infrastructure for data sharing. And so they define also which kind of actors can work as data intermediaries. Now, what is very interesting there, I don't know if you remember under the GDPR, all the discussion about data traveling to third countries and the fact that companies have to ensure that an equivalent protection in these third countries would take place. We had very recently the SREM 2 decision and all the consequences this entails for the privacy shield, for example, for the people of us that are listening and watching this from the US. Now, a similar concept is included in the Data Governance Act for non-personal data. And this is called the shielding provision. This is something I would like people to focus on so stay with me one second. As the GDPR was looking at equivalent protection of personal data in third countries, this Data Governance Act is looking at this for metadata. So they are basically talking about this shielding provision that would require companies that handle sensitive data They don't define sensitive data in a very clear way, though. So this is very holistic definition for the moment. So companies that are handling sensitive data will need to have adequate measures in place to prevent that this data can get in the hands of authorities in third countries, so outside of Europe, that do not have equivalent protection in terms of, let's say, intellectual property rights and trade secrets law than the ones we have in Europe. So intellectually, they're trying to do exactly the same exercise we had for the GDPR for equivalent protection of the personal data. But this time, this is about non-personal data, and it's about equivalence of intellectual property and trade secrets regimes in third countries. So this is something extremely important for every company which is looking at data, because it creates also a number of responsibilities and liabilities when handling this data. And also it puts the onus on the company to understand if the eventually third country regime is equivalent or not. So now this is very relevant in a global world, because it's not necessarily all the time that metadata from Europe are going to be processed and looked at only in companies in Europe. So this is the first very important step of this Data Governance Act. And so I think for the insurance sector and in general for all financial services, this is very interesting to look at with in mind the idea, okay, so how this data should be protected, especially if they're traveling to a third country, and what we can do to ensure they are protected in the right way. Now, this is the beauty of this is that we are in the beginning of the discussion. So I'm describing the regulation draft that was published in November. Now this has to go to Parliament, and it has also to go to a council. We expect the legislative procedure to be at least 18 months long, because this is the average length of the procedure. So there is a lot of time and space to work on this draft and to see how this could be modified and how will be modified. But the ideas in there are very interesting, and I see this as an extension of what the Commission has achieved with GDPR to metadata and non-personal data. So between this Data Governance Act and the e-privacy regulation that I was already describing, I think we already have a lot for this year, but there is more to come, and I would be happy to provide more on that before we close the webinar on what's next. If this is not enough, we have more.
I'm sure we'll definitely get some more from you, Monica, in the next discussion point. But I do want to come to Alan. I mean, following on from what Monica said there, you know, there is a way that, you know, we can kind of see what's happening with these regulators. You know, good examples from you know, GDPR and the European Commission there. But I mean, Alan, have you got any kind of case studies? You work with insurers, with loads of different insurers to kind of get these projects off the ground and see them to fruition. I mean, do you have any kind of useful case studies of how, you know, you've worked with these insurers to get the most out of customer data or use this data effectively, you know, whilst that kind of looming black cloud of regulation has sort of been hanging over you as well?
Yeah, so you know, I think there's some principles, right? There's some pillars that will be consistent, I think, through any initiative, public, private sector, any data initiative, if your goal is to transform data to that strategic asset to solve a business problem. So number one, you know, technology, people, and process are always tied together, right? One won't solve the problem. And so two, what we have found is the organizations that are the most successful solving this problem, they've submitted that there is a framework that shapes their enterprise data management approach, right? So starting with what Monica mentioned, let's start with data governance, right? The people side to data governance is that executive sponsorship and that data governance council, where you're defining the functions and the roles and responsibilities of the people who play key roles in your data program. But you know, there's a technology piece as well, where you're developing and implementing data stewardship processes. And that's what Monica shared. You know, the data stewardship component around data and how to share data becomes critical in the data governance space. Then you move to another pillar in this space, the data architecture, right? Confirming your data reference architecture, establishing data models, or leveraging data models from organizations like Oracle, you know, where we have the data models to meet specific regulatory needs. and then integrating your data architecture and enterprise architecture to solve that data architecture space. Then you move down to a discipline called data asset development, where this is more around data ops, right? How are you deploying data assets over time to meet your high priority use cases? And of course, that takes people, but that also takes technology to monitor and improve the quality of your data assets, which then leads to your data asset or data quality pillar, where you have the capability from a technology perspective to profile the data, to cleanse the data, to map the data, to create your data quality rules and leverage reporting tools to meet that business requirement. And this ongoing component of monitoring and improving data. Data context was discussed. The technology side is, having a business glossary, implementing and integrating, metadata repositories to make it, to allow data to be accessed in a way that you understand the data asset, and also providing some type of data lineage so you know where the data came from, especially with big data, right? Structured and unstructured data. Then, of course, the favorite topic is analytics, but understanding analytics is a part of a broader program. If you don't have the preceding components, your analytics, for example, the quality won't be in place if you don't have the predecessors. But you certainly need, people, process, and technology there, leveraging data visualization techniques to enhance the user experience, or predictive modeling and cognitive approaches to support the program. And then lastly, maybe certainly your infrastructure component, which certainly is your network and your cloud or on-premise. And so I guess to answer your question about can technology be used to get the most out of customer data, and the answer is absolutely, but not without having the people and process involved to solve that business problem. And the framework I just went through is one of many frameworks. Gavrash's 7 streams framework. There's DAMA, but I think it's important to have a framework that you're following to solve any data problem, in particular when the business case is regulatory.
And I'm going to follow up with you there, because we're going to come to our next discussion point. But you mentioned, people, process, technology, and these all working together. We were going to get you to sort of discuss this, insurers working more closely with regulators to become more efficient. But I think you kind of covered that with our kickoff. So I'm just wondering, if you're speaking to someone, you're going in and kind of helping someone with their business. I mean, are there any kind of principles that you put in place to make sure that the people and the process are there before the technology enables it? I mean, are we essentially saying that, companies are just going to have to fire half their workforce or spend a load of time, redoing every process that they currently undertake?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think people are on different paradigms. What I do know is true is there are solution providers that have solved this problem through software development, as an example. It's the whole build versus buy, evaluating the landscape and understanding what partnerships need to be in place to help you advance your data program, and balance that with what do you need to do in-house, right? And so I think the biggest opportunity for folks is to evaluate the landscape to find out what can be achieved through acquiring IP versus what can be achieved internally. I think about our organization, and I know for a fact that we're solving some very, very challenging regulatory issues, IFRS 17, the European Banking Authority regulatory issues, Solvency II. And I know the data models are there, and the data assets and the data elements are in place. And so why build something from scratch when you have tools available that just makes you more efficient? And so every problem's different, and everyone's at a different state in their maturity. And so I think it's always important to take a step back when you think about people, process, and technology. How can you optimize those areas to achieve your ultimate business goals? And so that would be my advice.
Mm. I mean, it's some pretty good advice there. I mean, Daniele, we've spoken a little bit about this so far, but I mean, how do these new regulations, when you hear Monica talking about these things that the European Commission has got in the pipeline, how do you react to that? Do you think, oh, this is going to be a massive barrier for me to get my next analytics project done? I can't use that type of customer data. Yeah, how does that affect you guys internally?
Well, first of all, we all know that insurance is a highly regulated industry, so we are all used to regulation. It's a big part of our daily trip, let's say. So, just to underline a bit what was saying Monica before, that in the last years the relation between regulation between authorities and companies and the industry is really changed. So hand in hand, there is a lot of work, an open dialogue that it's really improving, especially in this fast-paced scenario where everything changes on a monthly basis, let's say. So it is really the good way to go, in my opinion. Then, yes, as I said, regulation-related activities are part of any insurance company daily job. So probably the best way to approach regulation is to not only try to comply basically to what the regulation is asking, but since the very beginning, putting around the table also people that can leverage on that regulation to foster innovation, to introduce something that is new. Because the key concept that I think we have to take in mind is that regulation is mostly or completely going towards the customer, is for the customer good, for the customer benefit. So if we have in mind this point, we are already working in the same direction. I mean, I have a couple examples in mind. If you work not having in mind the regulation to give some value to the customer, probably at a certain point in time you will have a regulation that will go in the same direction. I remember, for example, working for marketing purposes on helping our marketing department to create new products, understanding deeply the customer needs and the offer that we have, that competitors have, putting all these things together to help create a new product that really fit any cluster of customers. We started doing this by having in mind giving something better to the customer. So it's sort of customer obsession, we can say. And then the product governance and the IDD came out, and it turned out that we had already taught a lot and have a lot of tools already going on that could help for the product governance. In the same example, just to complete, trying to understand all the drivers of the customer choice, we thought that it was relevant that the customer were able to understand our documents, our contracts. And so we started a research in Italian that usually when speaking about natural language processing is not the most common language. And so we started internally a research in order to build a tool that could assess how simple or complex a document was. After a few months in Italy, the Italian regulator came out with a letter to the market asking for clear and simple contracts, and we were working in that direction already. So maybe it's not always this, it's not always this, but if you have a sane customer obsession, if you work, if your project are pointed to deliver value to the customer, you are on the same line with the regulations. Somehow you can find same similarities and some work already done.
I just want to apologies for moving on so quickly, but we are a little bit pressed for time. Just want to finish off this last question. Monica, coming back to you finally. What do you think that we can see from a regulatory aspect? Let's say over the next year. What are Daniele and Alan gonna have to lose sleep over lose sleep at night over?
Well, this is very easy for me to reply because we had a very enlightening speech from the European Commission President von der Leyen on the 5th of February, so just a couple of weeks ago. And she explained that in the spring, so in the coming month, we will see two things. First, we will see the Data Act. Now, this Data Act is the second step of the data strategy of the Commission after the Digital Market Act that was published in November that we just discussed. So we will have a Data Act. In her speech, it says that Mrs. von der Leyen says that the Data Act will contain proposals on health data spaces, and that the idea will be to put in the driving seat the company or the people who generate data. I'm quoting here, so I'm just quoting from the speech. So that's first thing, the Data Act. Let's look for the Data Act. We should have this in the spring. Second, and also equally important, this artificial intelligence legal framework, which is expected to be out in April. And this should cover how algorithms analyze and process this data, customer data, with the idea of looking also at any possible liability and unfair or unethical processing of such data can create to the customer. So this is also very interesting. Both initiatives should be published in the spring. So I would say April. I mean, rumors in Brussels are that the AI one will be out in April and the Data Act should be out in March, but this can of course change. I don't have the exact date, but in the next couple of months, we are expecting to have these two out. So again, the legal framework on artificial intelligence, which will look at, high-risk applications of AI. They will talk about human oversight of AI, so how the algorithms are processing the data, whether there is human oversight, and then this Data Act. I think the two together, plus the e-privacy regulation final step, if the Portuguese presidency is successful, should already occupy us for the next 6 to 8 months. And I'm sure then this will go to Parliament and Council, and we will have hundreds, if not thousands, of amendments. So that should cover very well the rest of the year.
So we've got an interesting thing for a couple of interesting points for our attendees, and certainly Alan and Daniele to think about there. All right, we are running a little bit over time, but we'll swiftly move on to our Q&A. So let's start off with Alan. I mean, it'd be interesting to get your point of view on this. This is about companies that are achieving great personalization. So this is from Hugh, who's a bit of a regular at our webinars. Lovely to have you back, Hugh. What are the best examples, if any, of companies that are achieving hyper-personalization without bending those data rules? Is there anything that you've seen in that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to organizations that have approached this data problem of regulatory compliance from the perspective of enterprise data management. It starts with having an executive endorsed leader responsible for the data assets, no different than you would have a CFO responsible for the financial assets of an organization. And the data program is embraced and endorsed by an executive sponsor, oftentimes the CEO. What we found in the Information Society of Chief Data Officers, data programs are often more successful when the data officer aligns to the business, in particular the chief executive officer, compared to operations. And so, having a enterprise data management approach with executive endorsed leaders really, in my opinion, and based on our experiences, often the result are successful programs because the sponsorship's there, the funding's there, the organizational structure proposed to help data become successful. Those recommendations and that work structure is there. And then certainly behind that is the investment. They're at the table. Enterprise data is on the strategic imperative for the organization. It's not tucked under operations and seen as a back office DevOps role, taking a DBA and making them the data executive. And I, love that function of DBAs, but you have to truly take a step back and decide if you want data to be a true strategic asset. So to answer your question, folks who kind of start with that paradigm typically are the individuals in organizations that are the most successful. And this is, if I'm talking to an executive audience, that would be the response. To the technical audience, you do need the tools and the processes and the disciplines to be successful. It's shocking when you look at organizations who are successful. They do have a maturity model and a governance, a enterprise data management model that they're not only following, but they're maturing against, right? And compared to taking a view at solving this problem on a one-off. And the example is analytics. Analytics is the candy, right? It's where you can see the data. It's flashy, but if you don't have the data quality, you don't have the data stewardship, you don't the surrounding core elements to enterprise data management, then ultimately you're unfortunately you're not going to be as successful as I think the ambition is. And so so hopefully that helps. I'm a big fan, and so are chief data officers in the programs I'm exposed to, and the companies we're exposed to. They really understand this space, right, of the organizational side, and the process side, and the technology side. So hopefully that provides some.
I certainly think so. I mean, it's so important to, it's almost like with the people, process, and technology side, right? Having that top-down backing and investment and funding, tied with all the other things coming together is always going to be hugely important, especially when it comes to something that can be as tricky as data. But we're running a bit over time. I do want to get swiftly through as many of these questions as possible. So Daniela, we're going to come to you. Well, if any of our speakers have noticed that, Daniela, did you see the AOPA paper on open insurance and APIs? One of our attendees has just asked, if you can maybe comment on how that's going to affect you. Is that something that you've become familiar with recently?
But not that much. I have to say that the APIs are for sure, the way to go. I have to deep dive this part to answer properly. But for sure, I can say that it's the way to go. Absolutely, So no way out of there. So.
So I mean, the paper is really about trying to get access to it and share, openly share insurance related data. So can I mean, I guess the question really is, how open should insurers be to kind of sharing that data? Is that something that's going to benefit you, for example?
Yeah, for sure. In terms of risk management of the policy, this is completely makes sense. I mean, for insurance, but for many other topic, I would say, and this is really relevant, but not that easy to go, because it's it's really difficult on one side to manage also internally the exchange of data for everything that we said before. So I said I didn't get through the paper. I only had the chance to have the idea as you comment. And my first thought was it would be, in an ideal world, it would be perfect to go that way. I don't know how complex it would be to really go that way. It would be really a game changer somehow, because it would change completely the way you approach to actuarial risks, to customer segmentation, and also the negative effects you might have. We mentioned before the let's say how you can negatively use those data, and how this data can really affect the customer negatively. So it's really a tricky point. Let's say, ideally speaking, it's a real good way to go again, but it has to be investigated how to do it properly. It goes also with the artificial intelligence regulation. Actually, yes, it's all connected. There is always the good part on one side, and on the other side, all the risks that has to be managed before, let's say, before getting there a bit too late. Yeah.
Absolutely. Monica, I see you nodding your head a lot. Is there anything you'd like to, kind of add to that and follow up on?
No, I would agree on the perspective from Daniele, and I agree that this is linked also to the discussion about AI and what this imply that the algorithm is processing data, how this is done, automated processing of data, whether there any ethical principle, what this will entail, if there is a biased processing of data, which are the liability that this can trigger. So as for the EIOPA paper, it's interesting because we had in the payments remit. We had this kind of discussion 1 year ago about banks having to share data with third-party payments providers under the TPP, under the PSD2, the Payment Service Directive number 2, and there was this discussion about how this data should be shared. And now the banks are asking the TPPs and in general the big techs to have the same back, so how they can get access to the data as they've been sharing their data. And here, the discussion in the EIOPA paper is kind of the same, but looking at the insurance sector. So it goes back to my idea of the Commission looking at data in a somehow holistic way, because they are looking at data before dividing this into sector-specific regulation or work. So it's interesting. I would agree with what Daniele is saying, and I agree it's absolutely the way forward, but if it's done in the correct way. And that's where the issue lies, how to do this in the right way. And that's the older discussion here.
I think there's one more question that's good for Daniele, which is, how do you as an insurer, this is from Clara, how do you as an insurer, Daniele, balance between GDPR and increased use of customer data? Surely, is there a golden ratio there, or do you just go, these are the rules, we stick to them? I mean, I imagine you do, but what's the ratio there for you guys?
Well, the best way to me is to try to build a framework, a solid framework in which you can move and clearly to find the right way to go for each use case, because in terms of GDPR, any application is different, let's say. So it has to be investigated specifically each case. So the best way to go to me is to have to build a framework that helps in moving forward very quickly at the beginning to find the right way to manage all the GDPR points without spending too much time each time starting from scratch the analysis. So I don't see a golden ratio. I see more a structure framework to where you can move in quickly.
Sorry to move on very quickly, but we've got some great questions here, and I think there's one that's very, very good for Alan to jump in on. So Alan, question here from Cedric: what data besides customer data, I know we've spoken a lot about customer data today, what data besides customer data is most useful for an insurer? What would you say, you'll go into an insurer and you say, here are the most valuable buckets of data?
Yeah, so that's a loaded question. I guess it depends on who you are, right? I mean, in the organization, from marketing to product development to risk and compliance. But overall, maybe an umbrella response, with the assumption that an organization is creating data assets, right, over time, really understanding and ensuring your metadata is in place along with data lineage, as you're creating data as an asset, right? So from an enterprise level, metadata and data lineage really help with data quality. So making sure that you have the full understanding of what it means to produce a quality data asset. And so, but yeah, I think it all depends. So in our experience, as an example, right now, customer data for either the distribution or a direct to consumer, the more you know about customers, the better you can serve them, right? And so right now, I think that's the big paradigm for sure.
So we're going to try and get through as many of these questions as possible. I think we'll get through probably two more. Daniele, how would you say that this is a question from Charles here. How would you say that you measure the quality of data from your customers? I guess it comes back to what data is actually useful. But how do you go about measuring, this data is good data versus this data is pointless? Let's not look at it.
Yeah, data quality is always more a matter of how do you manage in terms of technology and controls the data. What happens to me is that I usually have to face, while I'm already working on the project, all the quality issues, and have to manage it. And it's not at all easy, because you have to manage also the expectations coming from the project you're managing, and sometimes the data quality topics is not taken in proper consideration as the modeling, let's say. So this is a really important point to take into consideration, but more in industrial terms, I would say that in a specific case. Then, of course, when you're approaching a model, you can let's say adjust. You can fix some data quality issues, work on that, or you can make it less relevant depending on the specific data. How much does the data is relevant for the application you're building? But again, I would say it's more a matter of framework related to data than analytics.
So getting that framework right is hugely important then. Alan, final question for you, just to finish things off before we get some key takeaways from all three of our wonderful speakers today. So, do you have any experience of this, Alan? So Joe has asked, how can insurers unify data between different countries? This is obviously a big thing for any company that operates multinationally, because that data sharing between countries, every country has different regulations. You go into the EU, there's different from outside the EU and Europe. You go into the States, for example, that's 50 different 50 different areas with different regulations. How do you go about unifying that? How do you go about kind of leveraging all of it to actually be useful?
Yeah, and I'll tell you this, I'm going to go back to some of the same core disciplines, and you'll be surprised how this can apply to a small organization or a highly dispersed organization, right? Oftentimes when you're solving a data problem, you have to have the fundamentals in place, right? Your data governance, your data stewardship, and your data glossary. So oftentimes when you we're talking about a data glossary issue where, you know, a term may mean one thing to one organization or one country versus another. And so the balance is, you know, are you trying to centralize your data program, or do they need to be kind of organic? And then you know, from the data assets, what assets need to be centralized? And so, you know, fundamentally, you know, organization, you know, based on the question, you're trying to build out a data glossary with data assets that can support a global organization. And you know, you can't avoid the disciplines I continue to suggest, right? You know, the stewardship, the governance, and eventually building out a data glossary and data dictionary to support the definition of data and the metadata on top of that data, so that asset can be used. And so oftentimes that, I mean, even within organizations in one location, different departments have different definitions, right, of data. And so it becomes very, very difficult to create that data asset that can be leveraged across the organization. And so just some of the fundamentals, right? Stick to some of the fundamentals. Yeah.
Those fundamentals, absolutely key. And yeah, we've luckily managed to go through quite a few of them today. All right, well, let's go into these final key takeaways. As always, if you've seen our webinars before, you will please re-enjoy that stock picture of a takeaway in front of you. So we're just going to go along the line, Daniele, Alan, and then finish with Monica. A key takeaway from this discussion. What do you think is the most important takeaway from our discussion? Daniele, starting with you.
But I would stress again the point where regulator authorities work with customer on one side and the industry on the other side. That is really the key point to me. The right way, if the dialogue is really open and done in the proper way, this can be a really game changing for all the industries. It's the right way to go. This is for me maybe the main takeaway.
That's the main thing for you, Alan. Key takeaway for our attendees.
Sure. And, you know, in a regulatory environment where, you know, meeting these deadlines is critical for your organization, I really think that leveraging this event to mature your data program, so that beyond the regulation, you're not only better prepared for the next one, but as an organization, you're more mature around enterprise data management and data asset creation, right? So this use case we continue to talk about, and I think someone in the chat mentioned this, you know, making sure that you're building out a capability while you're solving this high priority business problem will leave you in a better place. And as you adopt tools and processes, you know, having a broader perspective on data asset creation will benefit the organizations, I think, longer term, rather than kind of a siloed view. Now, in saying that, if that's what an organization needs to do because they're so far behind in meeting a regulatory need, then we understand those problems. But, you know, for the organizations and the people who can take a step back and mature their enterprise data management program with this high priority business case, I think there's your prime opportunity to set yourself up for success with the transformation of data to a strategic asset.
Absolutely. And just to kick things off, Monica, what would you say? I mean, maybe you know, any key takeaways, but maybe some advice for our attendees from you know, from someone who works quite closely with the regulators. Is there anything you can share there?
Sure. I mean, I agree with Daniele and with Alan, and I especially with the strategic perspective that Alan is giving. You know, because knowing what will be the regulation in the coming year allows you to build your products now, and allows you to know which kind of propositions you can create that are compliant before even existing. So my advice to all my clients and to the audience in this case more broadly is understand the regulation now and prepare for it when this becomes applicable in 18 months from now. And the sooner you adapt your proposition to that, the better you will serve your customers, because you will know already that it's law proved or approved by law or legal by design, if you wish.
Mhm.
So I think regulation is a tool, and I see the regulator as a partner in what we do. They need the industry expertise, and as far as I can only speak for Brussels, so I can only speak for the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council, but they're really wishing to discuss with the industry, and they're really listening and embracing the perspective of the industry. Doesn't mean they always follow it, but they're happy to discuss and exchange. So this is very rich and a very good position for the industry to be. Because it allows the industry to build a safe products and safe propositions for the years to come, which are already somehow compliant with the next legal framework. So the strategic word, I think, is key. I mean, what Alan was saying and also what Daniela was saying about, the strategic aspect of this. This is the takeaway I would like everyone to bring home after this webinar. Use regulation to build your strategy as one of the parameters for your future strategy of products, of course.
Yeah, so that strategic alignment, absolutely fundamental.
Yes.
Very, very good way to cap things off. All right, thank you so much to everyone who has joined us today. That is all we have time for. Of course, a massive thank you to our speakers for joining, and an even bigger thank you to Oracle, who've worked so hard on putting this webinar together with us. As always, a recording will be sent out by us of this session within the next couple of days, in case you missed it, would like to see it again, or fancy sharing it with a friend, relative, or enemy. As always, next Wednesday's webinar is taking place at the same time. You can see the link to register on the right-hand side of your screen. We are going to discuss how the insurance offering has drastically changed with technology, with consumer trends over the past 12 months. We're going to have AXA's head of digital, Joanne Pupo, and Microinsurance's Richard Leffley. Two fantastic speakers once again for you. As always, just to round things off, a gentle reminder, please do fill out this survey, which will pop up once this session ends. Really helps us understand how we can improve things. Do you like the format? Do you hate the format? Whatever it is, please do let us know. As I say, that is all we have time for. Thanks so much to everyone again, and stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.